Tonight I'm showing you my bucket pulley system. In order to make this treehouse more interactive, I added a bucket pulley system so the kids can bring stuff up from the ground to the upper level. This consists of three major parts: the locking hand crank, the pulley arm, and the bucket. The locking hand crank is made out of Baltic birch plywood, which is probably the highest quality plywood you can buy. The most complex part of this is the gear wheel. This wheel has to have gear teeth that are very precisely spaced and sized so it can lock equally well in any of the notches. With 6 teeth on this wheel, each tooth is spaced 60 degrees off from the one before it. Once drawn out, they were cut out on the drill press and the scroll saw. The other pieces of this mechanism are the square sides, which will mount to the treehouse post, the rounded mounting pieces, which also connect to the treehouse, the round sides of the spool, the crank arm, the center shaft, and the handle. The locking lever was also attached to one of the square sides with a few washers to keep it loose on the screw. Some of the center holes in these pieces need to be tight on the shaft and others need to be free spinning. In order to open up some of these holes, I used a Dremel tool with a sanding attachment, but be careful because this can take away material pretty fast. I also drilled a hole directly through the center shaft so the rope could be tied through. Once all of the pieces were cut and sized correctly, the whole thing was assembled together. I added some nylon washers between any of the moving parts to allow it to rotate more freely. For the components that needed to rotate with the center shaft, I screwed these directly to the shaft. The pulley arm was a Y-shaped log, which was cut and sanded to fit the structural post. I added 2 eye bolts to hold the pulleys. Because the eye hooks were so thick, I had to bend them apart with some channel lock pliers in order to get the pulley to slip onto it. The bucket was made out of cedar planks, which were cut to length and ripped with a 30-degree angle on the 2 long sides. I left 2 of the pieces much longer. These were then cut out, sanded, and had a hole drilled in the center for the bucket rope to go through. All 6 sides were then glued and assembled together with 2 strap clamps. The bottom of the bucket was made by gluing together 2 cedar planks and then tracing the inside of the bucket. After cutting out this base, it was nailed onto the bottom of the bucket. I could have done some really cool joinery for the base, but I decided it needed to get done quickly and my kids really wanted to use the pulley. The whole system was then installed and mounted to the treehouse. I also placed another eye bolt closer down to the spool in order to make sure the rope feeds evenly onto it. The pulley arm was anchored with some really long lag bolts in 2 places to one of the treehouse posts. After a basic explanation of how the locking mechanism worked, the kids were off and running and quickly started bringing all their toys to the top of the treehouse. Once they did that, they promptly threw them back down onto the ground again. I hope this video inspired you to build one of these yourself and put it in your treehouse. Please subscribe below and see you next time.